Purity and faithfulness are shown ultimately by how we speak and live out radical hospitality and love to all people. This was the message that Jesus himself was about to be challenged as he traveled over to Tyre. Needless to say, this did not make the Pharisees very happy, and Jesus and his disciples knew the Pharisees were not very happy about his response. The disciples even came to Jesus later saying, "You know the Pharisees are upset, right?" They were worried about what these men were capable of and what they might do to Jesus and his disciples. So they travel across to the land of Tyre, which is a port city on the Mediterranean. So if you're at the Sea of Galilee and you go left, you hit the Mediterranean, that's probably Tyre. It was a major port city at the time. But this was not known as a particularly Jewish side of town. And in fact, more of the religious or upstanding Jews thought that Tyre was a toxic wasteland or an unclean area. Have you ever seen a toxic wasteland? I think I was at a toxic wasteland this week. Allison and I went with Lance Haymore and Julie Henson down to Charlotte to the Tim McGraw concert. We love country music. We really enjoyed Tim McGraw. It was a whole lot of fun, right? But there were sections of the crowd that if I think of what a toxic wasteland might have meant to some of these Jews, these could have been a toxic wasteland perhaps. If you've ever been to a big country concert, you might know what I'm talking about. This was a crowd that would make the rowdy section at Bowman Gray Stadium look like Vacation Bible School. It was that kind of place. It was a great time. We loved it. We liked it. We loved it. But I think it's going to be a while before we get any more of it. And we're all very proud or thankful that it's not the company or the environments we put ourselves in that defile a person. We were just able to enjoy the Tim McGraw show. So Jesus goes into Tyre, and the story builds, and we expect Jesus to go into this place and immediately do something that will turn his religious establishment on its head, right? That's what Jesus does. That's what we're used to seeing Jesus do. But this is not what Jesus does when he gets to Tyre. Maybe on his journey over, he had thought about what the Pharisees had said to him. Maybe now he too was worried about what they might do. Perhaps Jesus was beginning to doubt his own mission. But we're told in verse 24 that Jesus entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Maybe he was just tired. I don't know. But regardless, he could not escape notice. People in the town had gotten wind that Jesus had come into their area, and they flocked to where he was because they wanted some of what he had to offer. And I think that's great, because I think that whenever we are serious about letting the life of Jesus live in us, we can't just hide from that, and that we'll always be put into positions where we can proclaim the gospel to all people in all situations. And that's kind of what happened to Jesus here. He had made a name for himself, and they wanted some of what he had to offer, and he couldn't hide. Now, if we jump back to our scripture in Matthew, we'll see what happens once the crowd flocks to Jesus. We're told that the first person that comes to Jesus is a Canaanite woman. Now, we know a lot about the Canaanites. If you know your Old Testament history, the Canaanites were the people who lived in the Promised Land before the Jews came in. So there was already an ethnic and religious difference between the Jews and the Canaanites. And there was also a difference in their heritage. Second, we get the sense that this woman has been Hellenized, which would mean that she has now identifying herself as a Greek. She identifies herself with the conquering Roman Empire. She has been assimilated into their lifestyles, into their functions, and into their religion. She is not Jewish. She is not a member of God's chosen people. She would be considered unclean and sinful and a worshiper of idols. She probably worshipped the Roman Empire like all the other Greeks did. Yet this woman comes to Jesus and cries out, "Have mercy on me, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." This outsider recognizes Jesus as the Messiah and cries out for his mercy and his liberation. She too wants what Jesus has to offer. But the text says that Jesus would not answer her. He ignored her. I don't know about you, but I expect a great and merciful and miraculous thing from Jesus here, but instead we are left with nothing. It's as if the woman wasn't even there or didn't even exist. The disciples even come and say, "Jesus, you got to do something about this woman. At least send her away. For all we know, the Pharisees are still watching, and we shouldn't even be talking to her unless you're going to do something special. So either blow us away with the grace of God here, or send her away. But Jesus answers the disciples with a statement that should blow us away today. He says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. This should shock us because this is not the "for God so loved the world" Jesus in this passage, right? If Jesus was sent only to Israel, I think we're all in trouble. But the woman continues now, not only for her own cause, but perhaps the cause of anyone who was not born into Jesus' religious community. She begs Jesus, saying, Lord, help me. Again, it is right for us to expect Jesus to finally give in and do something great here. Perhaps do something Christ-like for the first time in the story. But it doesn't happen. Jesus offers her a new statement that is perhaps even worse than the first. He says, it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Here Jesus calls this woman exactly what the Pharisees would have called her, a dog. Good for nothing. Then and now in the Middle East, and this was the case when I was in Egypt a few months ago, dogs are wild vermin and scavengers. They're not pets like we have here in America. Dogs would be considered rats. That would be the equivalent to our rats. Vermin that kind of come up and chew on wires or eat up our gardens, not thought too highly of. Jesus calls this woman a dog, and for a moment it seems like he refuses to welcome her to the children's table. You have to know that I'm not really sure why Jesus does this. This is a difficult passage today. If you've read Mark's article in this week's newsletter, you know that sometimes the lectionary throws us a text that we have to wrestle with and struggle with. Maybe passages like this are present to remind us of how messy life can be, but I don't know. I do, however, think that there is something for us in the humanity of Jesus in this passage. As Christians, we declare that Jesus is fully God and fully human, which means Jesus would have struggled with things just like we do. If Jesus had been taught to hate a particular group of people, God would have to teach him different. I think God longs to teach us the same today. So Jesus denies her a place at his table and calls her a dog. How would you respond to that? I think in this moment, as this story has progressed, I would kind of give up. I would get kind of weary. This woman won't have any of it. She continues saying, yes, Lord, but even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from their master's table. She knows that she is less than desirable to the Jews, and she doesn't even deny that she is a dog. She humbles herself in a moment and cries out for just a small piece of what Jesus has, just the crumbs of his table. Remember, she's a Canaanite Greek woman. She had been around the block religiously a time or two. She had tried every outlet for deliverance, and none of them had been able to give her what she needed. She is seeking a better system to live by, and she wants what only Jesus could give her, but not even a lot of it, just the crumbs. At this, Jesus' heart finally changes, and he says, oh, woman, how great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. I think Jesus knows that he has been off track here, bogged down and weary by the customs of his own tradition. But the woman had faith that Jesus could save her even though she was not a member of God's chosen people or the religious in crowd. At this, Jesus is moved to compassion and gives her exactly what she wanted and more. The outsider, the outcast, and the dog comes to Jesus wanting just the crumbs of his table. But instead, Jesus decides to invite her to his table. She wants only a piece of the pie, but Jesus gives her the whole thing. This is a beautiful end to a very difficult story. Here we see Jesus, who is not big enough to be ashamed to learn something from a Gentile Canaanite woman. While we cannot be certain about how this may have affected Jesus' ministry, one thing we do know is that by the end of Matthew, the gospel is not just for the children of Israel, but the gospel is for the whole world.